Now, this subject which we are going to discuss today, I don't think it really applies to any of you all because you are working in a protected environment and you don't have any incentives as regards private practice or any access to unscrupulous ways of making money. But when you go out into the wicked world, as they say, then this becomes very, very important. Because unfortunately for us, the standards of medical care in our country have deteriorated sharply. And I've had an occasion to discuss this topic in various cities. I know Bombay because I work in Bombay, but I've had occasion to discuss this with clinicians in Madras, in Calcutta, in Bangalore. And whenever I discuss this topic, I always start off by saying that, look, all my observations are only pertaining to Bombay, because that is the city I know. And I'm sure that conditions in your city are much better. At the end of the talk, when we have a conversation with some of the senior doctors over there, they tell us the conditions in our city are as bad, if not worse. So it seems as if unethical practice is widespread. Not everybody is unethical, but it's almost as if it's a minority group which is practicing good ethical medicine where the principal focus is on the welfare of the patient and the welfare of the patient alone. So it seems that that is dwindling, that kind of practice. So let's go very briefly through some aspects of what we call medical ethics. And we start with definitions, and these are the definitions which I have got after consulting a number of dictionaries and some papers, and these seem to be quite relevant and rational. In any part of human activity, whether it be in medicine or whether it be in law or whether it be in any other profession, the term ethics is referred to the actions and the thoughts that the person who is going to make decisions has. And when we talk of ethical action, we say that this is morally correct action, that this action is moral, as against immoral. Now, then that automatically raises a question, what is moral? What is morality? And that is derived from this Latin word. And morality refers to an aspect of character, one's own character. And this aspect of morality makes an individual function in what is called a correct and a good manner. Not in a criminal manner, not in an abusive manner, not in an arbitrary manner, but in a good manner and in a correct manner. So when we combine this term of ethics with medicine, medical ethics usually indicates a code of conduct. And it's a code of conduct which governs every action of the medical professional. And the principles, basic principles which underlie medical ethics eventually are aimed at making us do the very best that we can for the patient who entrusts his life and his body to our care. See, remember, when a patient comes to us, and particularly in a field like neurosurgery, he is literally giving you power over his life. When you tell him that I'm going to operate on your brain, and he accepts, he says, yes, doc, please go ahead, do the operation. He is putting his life in your hands. It's up to you now. You can kill him or you can make him well and send him home. And so ethics dictates that you will do your very best for this patient who is trusting you with his life or her life. Now, what were the ancient Indian views? We are very rich. We have a very rich heritage. And the two principal figures that have written about ethics in their work, they didn't call it ethics because at that time it was part and parcel of behavior, normal behavior of the physician. But the principles that they enunciated are very similar to the principles that we use today. And these two gigantic figures were Çaraka and Sushruta. Now, we don't know when Çaraka and when Sushruta lived and worked. Indian experts say that they were around 2000 years before Christ. Western experts say no, they were around 600 years before Christ. Whatever it is, they were a long time ago. Now, each of them developed a school. They had pupils and the pupils had pupils and so on, so they developed schools. The Çaraka school and the Sushruta school. Just as in ancient Greece, Hippocrates developed a school. He had his pupils and pupils and so on, so there was a school. Now the works that have come down to us, the works of Hippocrates, the works of Çaraka, the works of Sushruta, are believed not to be the works of just that one person, Çaraka or Sushruta or Hippocrates, but the works of many of his successors as well. So it was the school which has contributed to what we call the Hippocratic body of works, or the Çaraka Samhita or the Sushruta Samhita. That is what scholars tell us. Now, both Çaraka and Sushruta have addressed many aspects of behavior in medical practice. They have covered, for instance, who should be a teacher in medicine. There are long passages on who should be a teacher. What are the criteria that must be fulfilled before you can call yourself a teacher in medicine? Similarly, there are criteria for who should be a student. They have their own criteria. The student has to fulfill those criteria before the teacher will accept that person as a student. What should be the behavior towards a patient? What should be a behavior when you visit a patient in the patient's home? What should be the behavior when you are called to treat the king or the king's employees or what we would normally call VIPs? What should be your behavior? Many aspects of the behavior of the physician are discussed in these works. I've only selected a few of them in this talk. Now, according to history and according to legend, the practice of medicine was passed down from the gods, as we saw the other day, in the Vedas, and one of the persons who is said to be the physician to the gods is Dhanvantri. If you read texts on the history of Indian medicine, you will find pictures. You will find a picture of Dhanvantri, you will find a picture of Çaraka, you will find a picture of Sushruta. These are all works of imagination. Nobody really knows what they look like. There is no authentic portrait of Dhanvantri or Çaraka or Sushruta. This is just what some person felt that this is what Çaraka looked like, so you normally see him with a top knot and with a beard. But these are all imaginary portraits. We don't have any genuine portrait. Now this is what Dhanvantri is said to have written about the purpose of medical science. And he says the purpose of medical science is very simple. When a patient comes to you, the patient has problems. Your job is to help the patient to get rid of his medical problem. That's your job. And if the patient has no problems and if he's healthy, then your job is to make sure that he remains healthy and that he doesn't fall ill. So preventive medicine, things like that. But the last part is very interesting. He says, medical science is eternal. It will be as long as we are here, mankind is here, medical science will be required. So it's eternal. It is sacred. And I think in our context, we have forgotten that medicine is a sacred profession. We are following something which should be holy. You cannot make it commercial. It has to be something which is like a priest of the highest character behaving in society, in temples, in spiritual discourses and so on and so forth. So medicine is sacred. and it has come down to you from the gods. This was Dhanvantri's statements. Now, I told you that Çaraka in his Samhita and Sushrut in his Samhita have written a whole lot of descriptions. I have selected just these instructions, and the instructions are not just 4 or 5 points. They're about 3 pages long instructions. So I've selected a few aspects of that. And the graduating student, when he was about to leave his guru, it was a guru-shishya param kind of relationship at that time. So he would work with the guru, he would probably work in the guru's house, probably live with the guru, and then serve the guru as he absorbed from the guru the principles and practice of medicine. And so, when the student was about to leave, as we would say when he was graduating, these were the kind of instructions that were given. Now, see the very first sentence. Always seek the good of all living creatures, not just your patient, not just humanity, not just mankind, but all living creatures. Because all living creatures should be treated with the same spirit. Secondly, with your whole heart. What does it mean, with your whole heart? That means all your attention is focused on just this one simple goal. And the goal is that a person who is sick, you will try to cure. There is no other consideration. The only consideration you have is, how do I make my patient well? You're not interested in how much money I can extract from this guy, how I can become a multimillionaire even if I have to fleece this guy. All those considerations are utterly foreign to them. They didn't know about those considerations. There's only one consideration. Here is a sick person, he's in pain, he has fever, he's suffering. I have to make him well. I have to help him to get rid of all his symptoms. Thirdly, what he said was that when you talk to a patient or when you talk to the patient's family, use words which are properly weighed. Think before you talk to your patient. Don't just come and blurt something out. Think, what am I telling the patient? What is the goal of what I am telling the patient? Choose your words very, very carefully and then talk. These words must be truthful. You can't lie to your patient. You can't lie to the patient's relatives. If the patient's condition is hopeless, very gently, very carefully, you have to explain to the patient that I'm sorry, but the condition is too bad, nothing can be done. Be truthful. Don't fool the patient. Don't try to make a mockery of medicine. They should be soft. The words should be soft. They should not be harsh so that the patient or the relatives get hurt by the words that you're speaking. And always the words should be aimed at benefiting them. They should be beneficial words. Try and tell them something which is encouraging. Try and tell them something which will boost their morale, if it is possible. And these words should be incapable of giving pain. You have chosen your words so carefully that no matter how anyone interprets those words, they will not be hurt. They will not be insulted. They will not be harmed by those words. So with understanding and mind focused only on what is calculated to do good to the patient, observe. Observe all things, which is what we are taught when we enter the first MBBS class. Observe. See how the patient walks in and try and learn everything that you can by observation before you even talk to the patient the first sentence. Now, very similar injunctions, very similar instructions or advice is offered from people who live miles and miles away from India. So if you look at the works of Hippocrates, if you look at the works of Avicenna, many of these great teachers of the past, you will find very similar instructions, very similar thoughts, very similar ideas which they have also put forth, which suggests that these are all universal concepts. They are not just restricted to India. The same concepts have occurred to philosophers and thinkers all over the world. It's the same with religion. If you go to the philosophy of religion, not the rituals, not the practice, if you go to the philosophy of religion, you will find that the philosophy of religion is the same. Whether you go to Christianity, Hindu, Islam, Jewish, any faith, whatever, the philosophy is the same. Do not hanker for practical goods. Do not try to be rich. Do not try to hurt anybody. Do not harm anybody. Try and benefit whomsoever you can. The basic principles are the same in every single religion. And that is why it is so unfortunate that today religions are at loggerheads, because they have forgotten the principles and they have become dogmatic, and because they have become insular. So the same thing with medical ethics. If you look at the works of people who have written 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, ancient medical philosophers and practitioners, you'll find the same kind of principles which have been enunciated. I now come to somebody who's relatively modern. And I use this person because he has been acclaimed, and quite justly acclaimed, as one of the great physicians of our times. As you see, he was born in 1849, died in 1919, died on Christmas Eve, 24th of December, at Oxford, where he was Regius Professor. And he has written on a variety of subjects. His main opus, his main book, is The Principles and Practice of Medicine. And but he was invited to talk to a variety of audiences, and so he prepared his lectures, and those prepared lectures are now available, have been available for a long time, in a book called Equanimitas and Other Addresses. So we have access to them. In fact, this book, Equanimitas and Other Addresses, is available on the internet and can be downloaded. You can download the entire book. You don't have to pay a naya paisa for that. So it is this Sir William Osler. He was very famous as the person who advocated bedside medicine. He said that you can only learn medicine at two places. One is the bedside of the patient, and the other is the autopsy room. So if you are examining a patient, if you are seeing the patient repeatedly, if you are watching the patient as he improves, as he worsens, and as he dies, that is how you learn medicine. You can't learn medicine from lectures, you can't learn medicine from books. Books are only aids, they are only they assist you. The true learning of medicine is at the patient's bedside. And if the patient is unfortunate enough to have an illness which kills him, go to the autopsy room and do an autopsy on him, because then you will learn what killed him, why did your medicines not work, and so on. So he was a champion of bedside teaching and of autopsies. And unfortunately, today, both these in many, many centers in India and abroad have almost disappeared. When I was working at the KEM hospital, in our department, we had an autopsy rate of something like 90 to 95%. 90 to 95% of patients who died were subjected to autopsy. There is a very good reason why we were able to achieve this rate, because we had, at that time, we had the Coroner's Act. And the Coroner's Act says that any unnatural death has to be followed by an autopsy. And we use that to say that any operation, patient dying after the operation, the patient died after an unnatural act. And so we use that act to get these autopsies. And we learned an enormous amount. At the same KEM hospital, today the autopsy rate is 5 to 10%. So it has dropped. And it's a pity that it has dropped, because you learn so much from there. The excuse is we can learn from CT, we can learn from MR. You can't. You can't learn what you see at autopsy from CT, MR, from any form of imaging. You can't handle tissues. You can't see the spread. You can't see how things have changed in that body. Anyhow, that's diverging from the main point. So this is what Sir William Osler wrote about what the physician's duties should encompass. And he says, we are here not to get all that we can out of life for ourselves, but to try and make the lives of others happier. That's a general statement that he has made. And then he goes to the practice of medicine. And he has written this exquisite sentence. it should be really engraved in our minds. The practice of medicine is an art. It is not a trade. It is not commerce. It's not business. It's an art. It's a calling in which your heart will be exercised as much as will be your head. Now here again, he's using the heart as a symbol for emotions, for feelings. And so your feelings will be exercised as much as your rational thinking. And I've given you the full title of the book at the bottom. And as I said, it can be downloaded from the internet. And if you have not seen this book, if you have not read this book, I beg you to please get this book and read it. It will change your lives. It really will change your lives. Because this man's power of expression is superb. He draws upon ancient philosophers, ancient physicians. He talks about ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and how medical practice has evolved from that time. And he, of course, provides his own thoughts of the kind that we have sampled over here. Now, what really constitutes medical ethics? We today have departments of medical ethics in many of the renowned centers of the world. And there have been eminent medical ethicists in many, many places, chiefly in Britain and in America as far as the English-speaking world is concerned. That is where we draw our inspiration for medical ethics. And the experts in America, there were particularly two of them, Beauchamp and Childress, they laid down these principles of medical ethics. They actually laid down 5 principles, and the last one was added by somebody else. The first principle is autonomy of the patient. And in very simple terms, it means that the final deciding authority on any step to be taken in relation to the patient is the patient himself. You are not the final authority. You are only the recommending authority. You possess knowledge, you possess expertise which the patient doesn't have, which the family doesn't have. So with this knowledge and with this expertise, you advise the patient and the relatives. I recommend that you undergo an operation. I recommend that you undergo an interventional radiological procedure. You are merely a recommending individual. It is the patient who has to decide. Now, for the patient to decide, he needs data, he needs information. He doesn't know anything about medicine. He doesn't know what interventional radiology means. So you have to explain to the patient that this is what it involves, these are the benefits which we are looking for, but sometimes there can be complications, and these are the likely complications. So you put all this information in front of the patient, let the patient weigh and decide, I want it, I don't want it. And if he says, I don't want it, you cannot go ahead and do it. There are some exceptions to this rule, but by and large, if a patient says, I don't want it, you cannot do it. Simple. There is, right from the beginning when this principle was first defined, there have been problems. Like there is a patient with acute appendicitis. The appendix has ruptured. Patient is on the verge of rupturing. If it ruptures, he's going to get peritonitis. So you tell the patient that you must have an immediate operation to remove the appendix. Patient says, no, I don't want any operation. You explain everything to him. If you don't, you'll get infection all over the abdominal cavity and you may die from it. He's saying, that's okay, but I don't want an operation. You treat me in whatever other way you want. I don't want an operation. There is a group which calls themselves Jehovah's Witnesses. The Jehovah's Witnesses do not accept blood from anybody else. They will not undergo a blood transfusion for any purpose. So you tell them that, look, you're bleeding furiously from everywhere. Your hemoglobin is dropping, your blood pressure is dropping, everything is going down. We must transfuse blood. They will say, no, I don't want any blood transfusion. You do whatever else you want, but no blood transfusion. Now that decision is final. You can't argue with that decision. If you violate his autonomy, you can be sued for having violated that person. You can be taken to the court of law and you can be sued. As I said, there are exceptions, there are ways of getting around it. Suppose the patient is unconscious and cannot give you a decision. He's unconscious. You have to do something to save his life. Then if there is a relative who is a legally responsible relative, you can get that person's permission. But sometimes we get patients brought in from the roadside. There is no relative, there is nobody else. Then what do? So then you take on the case paper, you make a case why this operation is necessary in detail, and you sign it, and then you take the signature, the consent of the head of the institution. So the dean or principal or whoever is in charge will sign. He will read your note and he will say, I agree, this patient needs an operation, please proceed. Because there is nobody else. What can you do? Either you do the operation or he dies. So there are ways and means of getting around this in certain circumstances, but by and large, it is inviolable. You cannot disturb the autonomy of the patient. The next one is confidentiality. Now, when we take a history, the patient tells us things or events which he won't tell his father, his mother, his brother, his wife. He won't tell them, but he will tell you. He will tell you that he visited a prostitute, for instance. He will tell you that he's consuming pethidine as injections because he's addicted to it. But he won't tell anybody else. Why does he tell you all this? He tells you all this for two reasons. One is that this will be important for your treatment of his illness. And the second reason is he knows that this information will not be passed on to anybody else. It will remain between the patient and between you. He knows that. That is why he will tell you things which he will not tell anybody else. Now, again, as in autonomy, there are certain conditions under which this confidentiality can be broken. I'll give you one example. In America, there was an Indian student in one of the universities. This Indian student fell in love with a girl who was working in the same university, an American girl. After some time, she said, no, I don't want any more relations with you. I'm going to break our relationship. I don't want anything to do with you. So he decided that he was going to kill her because she was spurning his affection. As it happened, he was under the care of a psychiatrist. So on one of those sessions, he told the psychiatrist, you know, so-and-so, I love her so much, I've done so much for her, I've tried to gain her affection, and she has rejected me, and I feel insulted, so I'm going to kill her. The psychiatrist gave him his psychiatric therapy, but did not do anything further than that. And as it happened, he went ahead and he killed that girl. And then the matter came to court. And when the matter came to court, this psychiatrist was summoned, and he said, yes, he had told me that he's going to kill the girl. So the judge asked him, then why didn't you go and tell the girl that this guy is likely to kill you? You know, take precautions or whatever. He said, no, the ethical principle of confidentiality does not allow me to do that. And the judge at that time made a ruling which has since become an internationally valid ruling, that if something is going to harm another individual, you can break confidentiality. So it was his job, it was his duty to have at least gone and told that girl, look, this guy is talking of killing you, take precautions. Now, in a more general context, this becomes applicable with diseases like AIDS. So suppose a patient has HIV infection, and the patient is tested under your care, and the report comes HIV positive. Everything, all the tests that are done for HIV, they're all positive, everything. The blood test and everything else is positive. Immune tests and everything. Now what do? Because this guy can spread that infection to his wife, he can spread that infection to other people. So you talk to him and you say, look, first of all, you have to counsel him because you've got a positive report. So you call him in and discuss this with him and say, look, this is there is treatment for it. Don't worry. I will do everything possible for you and we will try and get rid of this disease. But this disease is communicable. So it is important that we inform everyone else who is at risk that you have this disease and they should take precautions. The most easy example to quote is the wife, that the wife has to use precautions to make sure that that disease cannot be transmitted to her in any way. Okay? This guy said, no, I don't want anybody to know that I've got HIV infection. If my employer comes to know, he'll chuck me out of my job. If my wife comes to know, she'll divorce me because I went to a prostitute. Whatever. He gives you all his reasons. And he said, I don't want this to be broadcast to anybody. Then what does the doctor do? Confidentiality dictates that he will not broadcast this news. But because this is likely to harm other individuals, the law allows him to break this confidentiality in a particular manner. You have to go through some kind of a system. So that is confidentiality. The next one is, there are two long words, beneficence and non-maleficence. In very simple English, it means do good, do not do any harm. The first, they are both two sides of a coin. Doing good is one side of the coin, the other side of the coin is do not do any harm. Let me take a practical example of how we can harm a patient. I examine a patient and I find that he needs an MR scan. So I tell the guy, you need an MR scan, but I want that MR scan to be done only at this particular center and nowhere else. Why do I tell him that? Because I get 33% of the cost that he pays to that MR scan machine unit, and it comes back to me as a kickback. So what is happening actually is that if an MR scan should cost say 5,000, it will actually cost him 8,000 because 3,000 are going to be given to me, and he doesn't know that the 3,000 is going to be given back to me. So I am in fact harming him by insisting that you will only get it done at this center because I want to benefit from that particular decision, and that is wrong. That is not what should happen. You can specify, I want this done on a 3 Tesla machine because the definition of the images is clearer, I can see everything much better. But you can't tell him, get it done at this 3 Tesla machine. That is wrong. Similarly, and unfortunately this is not fiction, this is fact, there are operations which are performed for which there is no need. Caesarean sections are performed in patients who can very easily undergo normal delivery. Why do you do a caesarean operation? Because the income that you get from a caesarean is much more than what you get from a normal delivery. And so on. So there are many acts which we perform not because we want to benefit the patient, but because we want to increase our bank balance. And all that is wrong. The next example is justice. What is justice as far as patients are concerned? Let me give you again a very simple example. You are in charge of a small civil hospital in a tiny little village. And that civil hospital has got a capacity of 4 beds. There are only 4 beds in that civil hospital. And as it happens, this civil hospital also has 1 ventilator for emergencies. So there is a situation where 3 beds are already full, the ventilator is free and 1 bed is empty. So ventilator is free and 1 bed is empty. At one time, 2 patients suddenly come to your civil hospital casualty, so to say. They don't really have separate casualty, but let's assume. One is the Prime Minister of the country. The other is a chap who is in rags who has been brought from the roadside. The Prime Minister of the country has got a highly malignant disease which has spread everywhere, including the lungs, so he can't breathe. The man who was at the roadside, who is in rags, dirty, filthy, obviously very, very poor, has got pneumonia, which if you treat efficiently, including the use of the ventilator, will survive and will live forever, as they say. Whom do you admit and whom do you give the ventilator? Justice demands that you will give the ventilator to that roadside patient because he has an illness which can be cured. It's a curable illness. The Prime Minister of the country has an illness which cannot be cured. He's going to die. No matter what you do, he's going to die. So you will not give the bed and the ventilator to the Prime Minister, but you will give it to that guy who has come from the roadside. That is justice. What happens in practice? There's a Prime Minister, there is his ADC, there are all kinds of VIPs all around him, and they will try and push it to you that you have to admit him, he's the Prime Minister of the country, Baba, that guy is a roadside guy. So that is where the question of justice comes in. I've just given you an extreme example, there are other examples. And the next item is an item which is specially applicable to all hospitals that deal with poor patients. It applied to the JJ hospital when I worked there, it applied to the KEM hospital when I worked there. The poor patient has no power whatsoever. He has no influence, he has no money. He has been fighting for the minimum that is required in order to be able to survive all his life. And so he has developed an attitude where whenever he has to go to somebody for help, he goes with his hands joined together. आप हमारे माँ बाप हैं, आप जो भी हम कर सकें आप मेहरबानी करके करिए. He comes as a supplicant. He doesn't come because it is his right to get treatment. He comes begging, please, please treat me. Because that is the way he has been forced to behave all these years. So, such a patient must be treated with dignity. You have to tell him that you don't need to do all this. This is your right. It is your right to come here. It is your right that I should examine you. It is your right that I should do everything that I can to help you. So please do not behave like this. That is dignity. And dignity also can become very important in other areas. And finally, what has been said by Osler and what has been said by Çaraka and other people, truthfulness and honesty in every single dealing by every single medical attendant. So that is the ideal. Those are the ethical principles. And how is it in India today? What is the kind of practice today? So on the left you have a bust of Hippocrates, and poor Hippocrates has been wounded, perhaps in many, many ways. And ethical principles, they lie in the garbage can. You try and talk to a group of medical practitioners about medical ethics, and very quickly you see that they have lost all interest. They are not interested in all this. If you were to tell them how they can make better investments and how they can improve their wealth, they are interested. We talk to them about medical ethics, ethical principle. हाँ यार ये सब ठीक है मगर हमारे ज़माने में ये सब नहीं चलता है. You can't behave like this. If you behave like this, you stop. And unethical practices are found in many, many, many aspects of medical practice. And here are some rather cynical statements which have been made, that everyone is corrupt. And you are telling me that I should be honest and I should be straight? And this happens because we have had seminars on medical ethics. And invariably, there is one person in that group who will get up and ask, hey, Doc, you are telling me I should be honest, I should be truthful, I should be straightforward, I should be this. But when I need my child to be admitted to a school, I have to pay a huge sum as a capitation fee. Even now, even for kindergarten schools, I have to pay thousands of rupees. If I want a small area for my dispensary, I have to pay pagdi and I have to pay money in black. Everywhere, if I go to a policeman, the guy demands a bribe. Everywhere, wherever I go, I see corruption and I see malpractice. And you are telling me that I should be honest and I should be ethical? I mean, how can you tell me that? And our answers have been very simple. Very simple answer. You have undergone 11 years of education in school? So he says yes. And then you had 2 years of education in pre-medical college? He said yes. So that's 13 years of education. And then you had 5.5 years of education in medical practice? So in medical college? He said yes. So 18.5 years. And then you spent 3 to 5 years as a postgraduate? He said yes. So you had 22 years of education. And what is all this education worth if you are going to tell me that because everyone else is raping a woman, I also have a right to rape a woman? If you tell me after 22 years of education that this is what you have learned, that if somebody else is doing something wrong, I have a right to do something wrong, then your education is worthless. You have not undergone any education at all. Then of course there is no answer, but he is not convinced that what we are telling him is what should be done. So it is almost as if ethics have become irrelevant in modern medical practice in India. And this is unfortunately worsening. We have been publishing a journal on medical ethics. That's the only journal on medical ethics in India and perhaps in Asia. I'm not sure about Asia, but I know that in India it's the only ethics journal. And it grew from an 8-page little pamphlet-like thing, and it is now a full-fledged index journal which is getting contributions from all over the world, like Neurology India. It's not as good as Neurology India, it's not as big as Neurology India, but it has survived. When we started this about 13 years ago, 14 years ago, 17 years ago, we were not even sure that it's going to survive. We said after 3 or 4 issues it will die. But it didn't die. And it has in fact flourished in a manner of speaking. So when we talk about this journal and when we ask audiences, how many of you know about the existence of this journal? Forget about reading the journal. How many of you know that this journal exists? The answer is close to 0. Nobody even knows that this journal exists, although it's been there for a fairly long time and it's the only journal of its kind in India. Nobody knows. So if this is the state of ethics, then we can only echo what Mark Antony had said, that medical practice has fled to brutish beasts and men have lost their reason. This is the only feeling that we can voice. And it is impossible for us to justify doing something which is wrong merely because everyone else is doing something wrong. I mean, surely we have the intelligence to think for ourselves. Surely we have enough reason for ourselves to say that this is wrong and this is right, and because it is wrong, I will not do it. But it seems very, very difficult. And these are the reasons why we feel that doctors must remain ethical. Because of our education, because of the fact that we are relatively speaking learned people, we have access to the finest minds and the finest thoughts of civilization, not just of our times. Starting from ancient times, we have access to all those works of philosophy, of literature, of science, of arts, of everything. And we have access to all those, and we have no justification for saying that because everyone is doing it, I am justified in doing it. In fact, we should be setting examples to the rest of society that in spite of everybody being corrupt, he is a doctor and he will never be corrupt. That is the kind of example that we have to set. And others should want to mimic what we are doing. This is, of course, the most blatant form of unethical practice in India today. And it is unfortunate, if you attend a meeting on medical ethics abroad, you will find them talking of current ethical problems. I'll give you one example of current ethical problems. It is now possible for us to do genetic testing to check whether a girl who is 8 years old will eventually develop carcinoma of the breast or not. We can do genetic studies and we can try and identify that BRAC gene or whatever it is. Their ethical quandary or their ethical dilemma is, should such a girl be advised prophylactic mastectomy? Okay? This is the kind of ethical problem that they deal with in ethics meetings abroad. In ethics meetings in India, we are still talking about whether cut practice is justified or not justified. We have never reached, we can't even reach those kinds of ethical dilemmas which are equally important for us. But we can never reach them because we are still stuck at this basic level. Even a common person will tell you this is wrong, but we are still debating. No, under these circumstances, cut practice is justified. What should be the quantum? Okay, don't give 33%, but at least let us take 15%, and so on. This is what we are arguing about today in meetings on medical ethics. So this is the level at which we are functioning now. The other aspect which has been worrying ethics experts for some years in India now is this business of medical tourism, where private hospitals will fly a patient and family in, will arrange 5-star accommodation for the rest of the family and 5-star accommodation in the hospital for the patient, and either before or after therapy will arrange 4 days, 5 days, 6 days on the beaches of Goa or in some other, or on the Kerala backwaters or whatever. All that will be organized as part of a package deal. And of course that package deal will cost a fortune, but it will all be arranged in that. And they hope, and they are in fact attracting many patients from abroad on that basis. And so it is causing a certain amount of concern. Is this ethical? Is this going to cause other problems? Is it going to make medical care for Indians who cannot afford this sort of thing more expensive and more difficult to obtain, and so on? I think I'm going to end with this slide, and that is on a very important aspect, which is the aspect of ethics committees, which Sanjay was discussing yesterday. Ethics committees are supposed to be composed of ethical individuals. I mean, you would imagine that that would be the primary consideration for appointment onto an ethics committee. Ethics committees are usually institutional, although there are ethics committees which are non-institutional. They are general ethics committees set up by some organization or group in that city. But let's talk only about institutional ethics committees. Institutional ethics committees should have majority of individuals who are not connected to the institution in any way. The persons who are connected with the institution should be in a minority in that ethics committee. Usually the dean or principal or whatever it is excluded from membership of that committee because he's a very powerful person. He can influence the committee. So the principal or the dean is not a member. The membership is not only of doctors. It is advisable to have an expert legal brain who may be a retired judge or who may be a very senior and competent and ethical lawyer. It may also have on its committee a senior journalist, because that journalist will see everything that is going on in that ethics committee, and if he feels like it, he will write about what is happening in the ethics committee. It is advisable to have one person who is of a religious faith. So it could be a priest, it could be a swami, it could be a mullah, mullaji, somebody who has got a religious philosophical background. And the last member that is advisable is a professor of philosophy somewhere. So this is the kind of constitution of this committee which has been advised. What happens in practice in most teaching institutions in India? The dean is the chairman of the committee. The assistant dean is the vice chairman of the committee. There are 5 professors, and there may be one perhaps judge or lawyer or somebody who has been called in and put on that committee. This is an invalid committee. This is a motivated committee. It will always function for itself, not for the individual. And it is also advisable that these committees have what is known as a forum where patients can complain. So any patient can complain, and that complaint has to be brought before this ethics committee for a judgment on whether his complaint is justified or not justified. If it is justified, who was guilty? And if somebody was guilty, then that person has to be punished. So these are the kinds of role. The ethics committee is also supposed to discuss any problem area in ethics in the hospital. Like for instance, I gave you this example of the girl who has got a positive BRAC gene, and the patient says, I want bilateral mastectomy. Is it ethical for us to do that bilateral mastectomy merely on the basis of the genetic report or not? So such issues have to be brought before the ethics committee, which hardly ever happens in any of the teaching institutions in India. This hardly ever happens. The most common item on the agenda of ethics committees in Indian hospitals is clinical trials. That's the commonest agenda. So if you read items on the agenda, if there are 16 of them, 14 will be on clinical trials. And there may be 1 or 2 on some other aspect. Which is ridiculous, but that is how it is. And clinical trials are a major problem in themselves as far as ethics are concerned. Because many clinical trials are conducted by pharmaceutical companies. They dictate everything. They dictate the question to be answered, the manner in which that question will be studied, the manner in which the answer will be formulated, and if the answer is unpalatable to the company, that will not be published. It will be shelved, finished. All this is completely unethical. So there are many problems with these areas also. Now, I'm going to stop now because I feel that there is much which remains to be done in our country if we want to restore the ethical principles that were handed down to us by Çaraka, Sushruta, Hippocrates, and all these great teachers of the past. There is a tremendous need for a major effort throughout the country if we want to restore to medicine the principles of medical ethics in practice. And we have been, our little group in Bombay, which is now spreading, we now have people in other parts of the country who are members of our society. We are trying. We've been trying for about 17 years. We have not seen any significant change in 17 years in spite of our efforts. So our efforts obviously are too small. We need much more. Thank you.